Hello, I'm Rick Sinding. We're here at the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University for the Center on the American Governor. Today I am interviewing Ray Bramucci, who served as Commissioner of Labor in the administration of Governor Jim Florio. Ray, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Let's begin with a little bit of your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? What did you do in your early days? And how did you end up in political life?
God, I don't know. But I grew up in Massachusetts, in Western Mass, a little town called Ludlow I was born in, and we moved to Chicopee. And at the age of 17, while I was a senior in high school, I dropped out of school and joined the Air Force. And that was my Rutgers. I just met all kinds of people who were literally in the Air Force to avoid the draft. And rather than going into the Army, they joined the Air Force or the Navy.
What period was this?
This was 1952. I was 17 on December 31st. I had to get a signature so my father could allow me. And 2 weeks later, I was in the Air Force. Didn't even shave. I was a little boy. Mm-hmm. And that was my education.
So you spent 4 years in the Air Force?
4 years in the Air Force. I was well, I started off being an aerial photographer, and since I couldn't take the roles in the movement, they put me in the lab where I developed color film from gun cameras that the fighter planes used to do, and it was a proving ground command where they were testing weapons. So I spent 4 years in Florida dodging Portuguese men of war.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
All right, you got out of the Air Force mid-50s, then what?
Came home just to show my father I could get up in the morning. Went to work as a power miller in a gun factory. Then changed to being a tire builder in the U.S. rubber factory. And I always had a feeling I wanted to go to New York and see the world and be with a couple of friends I was in the military with, so I came to New York, and I had no job or no money or anything. I went to work in B. Altman, which was a upper group retail store selling rugs. I once sold rugs to Billy Rose. I once saw Marilyn Monroe walk through the place. I was a real celebrity watcher. And while I was there was a union organizing drive. And while I left the store on Fifth Avenue, I took a leaflet and I talked to one of the organizers. And the next day I was told I was fired for being a union troublemaker. And I always had this feeling, because even at the age of 21, I was assistant shop steward in the rubber factory.
So you had been a member of a union during that period? As
a kid. Mm-hmm. Just as a kid, I didn't know what the union was. Well, I was reading New Republic, which I subscribed to, and there was an ad in the paper inviting socially conscious young people who wish to better the lives of lower paid workers to call this number and see if they wanted to be trained as a union official. And I called. And sure enough, I got a call back, and I was interviewed by 4 really old men, 2 Polish Jews and 2 Italians, both of whom spoke 11 words of English each. But they used words that were almost English, but they weren't. And they weren't Yiddish either. They were just something that they had made up as they went along. And they asked me to come to school. And they trained me for a year. That's where I met my wife. She was a secretary there.
Now, when you say socially conscious, did you consider yourself socially conscious at that time? Or did the fact that they accused you of being a union organizer drive you into a union organizing frame of mind?
I was always prone to be pro-worker and not pro-employer. I didn't identify with the employers. I always identified with people who worked hard. My father was a real hard worker, and I knew that was what I always wanted to be, a hard worker, whatever I did. And so emotionally I was pro-union. But I was a strange mixture in that class because we had Bolshevik kids, Trotskyists. I was recruited by every variety of Trotskyist and communist that there ever was in the world in New York. And I always said no. So I never was happy during a strike. My friends were, but I kind of I always felt the pain of people who were caught in between. And the difficulties that, yeah, I wanted to win, but I didn't feel really great about it.
Did you feel as though the Bolsheviks, the Trotskyites, were trying to draw you in to convert you to communism? Or,
yes.
And you resisted?
Yeah, I had no interest in any kind of a ideology that was kind of hero worshiping. I was always an individual, and I was always a little different. Even among my friends, I was a little different. I was an old man when I was 22. I thought about things, and I was crudely educated, self-reading and debating and arguing with people that I knew, and there were some vigorous debates and arguments, but out of that came who I am.
Mm-hmm. So you complete this course, and what happens then?
Well, I go on a field trip first to Virginia to organize. We try to organize a knitting mill in Roanoke. Then I came back for more education, and they sent me out again this time to, I started off in Georgia, but then I was transferred to Mississippi. And the one noteworthy thing that happened in Mississippi was I was followed continually by the local gendarmes. And one day, I came into town it was near Laurel, Mississippi. I don't remember the town. And I pulled in angle parking. Of course, stupidly, I had Virginia plates, which was like the same thing as having Soviet Union plates in Mississippi. And my wheel was on the line, and I was arrested for, I don't know what, they didn't tell me exactly, but I went to jail. And every time the union lawyer would try to get me out, they moved me to another jail. I saw 3 or 4 really horrendous jails in Mississippi. I finally got out and survived and came back and that was assigned in New York City.
Mm-hmm. Who employed you at this point?
The International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which is no longer, mm-hmm. which is a tragedy. It was a great union because it always saw its responsibilities as being consistent with good citizenship. They didn't have me first as an idea. They knew that whatever they did, they had to do it in the context of advancing working people.
I didn't realize that the ILGWU no longer existed. And when you drive into New York, heading to the Lincoln Tunnel, there's a big sign, which I guess that's Jersey City or maybe Union City, that says home of the International Lady Garment Workers Union for 100 years or 120 years.
I didn't know that. Well, we've left a lot of housing. We built the Chelsea housing mm-hmm. in Lower Manhattan, which we used the money that we had amassed in the health and welfare funds to build housing that would be within reach of the better paying union members. They got priority, but not necessarily was it exclusive. And that has remained a major source of good housing stock. Mm-hmm. And people laughed at us because the yield on those bonds was like 1.3%, and other unions were getting 7, 6. But we did it in a socially conscious way mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. to invigorate the housing market for working people.
Well, Chelsea doesn't need any invigoration now, does
it? Yeah. And that's what I identified with. I was a very happy man for a long time there.
What did you do in the ILGWU? You were with the ILGWU for a long time.
Well, my first job, I was editor of a 8-page monthly. And I realized that the manager of the local, who was a egomaniac, the whole idea of the paper was to talk to members about benefits and duties and whatever. But the big thing was to have his picture on the front page. And I got real smart. I began to have 2 or 3 pictures of him on the front page. And I became pretty popular. But at that time, I represented members who were having problems with their landlord. I would go to rent board hearings and represent them, of course, free of charge. And of course, all the landlords thought I was a lawyer. And we had a lot of success. And that probably did more to help members than a lot of other things that we used to celebrate. We were there for them. And we helped them with citizenship issues. We referred them to friends, not in any kind of formal way when they got into trouble. I did that. Mm-hmm.
So you were a union organizer for a long, long time.
Yep, 22 and a half years.
How did this morph into or lead you into the arena of politics?
One day, my wife and I were in a Huffman Coos store, and we had an argument over an end table. And because we had that argument, we ran into a guy, Jerry Breslin, who at that time was the county chairman of the Democratic Party in Bergen County. And I had been COPE director there, so I knew him.
COPE?
COPE, Committee on Political Education. I gave out checks to candidates that we endorsed. And he said, "You're the guy." I said, "I'm the guy for what?" He said, "Well, Bill Bradley was just elected, and he's looking for a state director."
So this is 1978?
Yes, 79, because he had been elected.
Elected in 78.
That's right, it was 78. Mm-hmm. And being a Celtic fan, first, the most basic fact of life, he's a Nick, and, I said, wow. And I seriously considered it because I was getting fed up in that the industry was sinking, imports were destroying the standards, and I was on the front lines making most of the decisions and being criticized for them when they weren't the best. Well, they weren't the best because we had no leverage. Mm-hmm. So I was ready to go. Because my personality, I eagerly accepted the responsibility without understanding that then somebody could, oh, look at that, look at this. The next thing you know, I got a call from Bill Bradley. And I went to see him, and I said to him first off that it's ironic that if he had run against Clifford Case, I would have voted for Clifford Case, who was then a very popular, moderate Republican, man of great dignity, who didn't take a false step in his whole career. And he was defeated in the primary by Jeff Bell, who at that time was a precursor of the supply-siders. And Bell won and Bradley won. And their campaign did not have one nasty slur or charge. They discussed toxic waste dumps, renewable energy, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I mean, they would debate this in front of people who didn't know what the hell they were talking about. But that's the kind of campaign it was.
You did not get involved in the Bradley campaign at all?
No.
You didn't even know him?
No, I didn't know him. Mm-hmm. I saw him at an AFL-CIO convention in Atlantic City, and I said to myself, he's a pretty thoughtful guy. I liked him.
Well, you certainly must have known him by reputation at that point.
Oh, well, I was a big fan of John Havlicek, mm-hmm. who was a Celtic star, and they guarded each other. And Bradley later told me that Havlicek was the toughest guy he ever played against. But so I took the job, and I came home. He offered me the job. I came home, and I said to Sue, my wife, that I was going to go work for Bill Bradley. And Michael, my son then, was about 12 or 13. And Sue said to him, "Hey, your father's going to work for Senator Bradley." And he bolted upstairs and slammed the door. And I went upstairs and I said, "What's wrong?" He said, Dad, all those years that Bradley held Havlicek, you let him do that, and now you're going to work for him? He played dirty. I said, well, I'll talk to him about it, but I don't know. And that was the story of my Bradley connection.
How much time did you and Bradley spend together discussing your responsibilities before he offered you? How well did you get to know him before he offered you the job?
I got to know him well, but I think the best story is that David Wald was then the columnist for the Star-Ledger, if you all remember. And Wald said to me one day, how well do you know Bradley? I said, I'll tell you what. I know, for instance, that he lives in North Jersey in a one-family house.
That's a lot more than most other people do at that point.
Because he would take a circuitous route home. Very private person. But I got to like him. And we didn't talk a lot about business. He educated me in the long times we spent on weekends when he was in the state. He's a hard worker. We started off at 6, 7 in the morning and then get home until 7 or 8 at night. And he really made an effort to reach out. And he knew a lot of things that I didn't know. I mean, I had no idea about the complexity of some issues, and it used to boggle my mind. But I knew things that he didn't know about life. So Pete Carrill, once the coach of Rutgers, said,
Princeton.
Pete said, there are 2 Rhodes Scholar. He's a Rhodes Scholar, R-H-O-D-E-S, and you're a Rhodes Scholar, R-O-A-D-S. And that was our relationship.
I spent a week on the campaign trail with Bill Bradley in 1984 when I was writing for a magazine, and literally spent an entire week. Everywhere he went, I went. I spent a lot of time interviewing him, talking to him, trying to penetrate, to get to know a little bit about something beyond the superficial. And I have to say, I never felt as though I got to know him. I could get him to maybe perk up a little bit when we talked a little bit about basketball. He actually did sometimes, very occasionally, want to talk about basketball. But most of the time, he wanted to talk about policy. That's all he really, he didn't want to talk about politics. He certainly didn't want to talk about himself and his upbringing and what motivated him. He wanted to talk about policy. Is that who he is, and is that how even people who got to know him for a much longer period of time would describe him?
Yes. Although, after a while, I penetrated. We spent so many hours together, and I got to see him at his home. I went to his home in Crystal City, Missouri, and he showed his real humanity there. I met his mother and father, and I went into the gym that he played basketball in. And I remember he had told me once when the movie Hoosiers was on, he said, Ray, that movie's about me, except we lost the game. He showed me where his father, who was in a wheelchair, would sit at the games in the local gym. And his father was a banker, and the town was owned by Pittsburgh Plate Glass. So he was an only child, famous from the time he was 15, and unpenetrable. Yeah.
Well, John McPhee characterized him pretty well in A Sense of Where You Are in terms of his basketball presence.
Yes.
And I often wondered whether that really sort of captured who he is as a person as well as a basketball player.
I think the book was very insightful. Mm-hmm. It was sort of a parable, but it was true. Mm-hmm. He was a Boy Scout, first and foremost. Duty. Not doing anything that would be untoward. This is a guy who spent nearly 3 terms in the Senate and never once introduced a special bill. Never. And it was consistent with what he thought his duty was as a senator.
What were your responsibilities as the director of the New Jersey office?
without sounding grandiose, I ran the state. I said, Bill, leave me alone. I know this state backwards and frontwards. I know the players. I won't get you into trouble. You take care of all the esoteria and all of the cerebral things. I'll get down and be with people and try to protect your flank. Because he didn't do that well. He was an amazing guy. We went to a board meeting of the New York Stock Exchange one day, and there must have been 60 people there in this long table. And later in the car, he said to me, how many names can you recognize in the list you got? I said, a few. He said, well, tell me which ones you remember. And I gave him about 6. When he got to 30, I stopped him. That's the way he was. He's a brilliant guy in an academic sense.
When during the time that you were working for him, did you have the sense that you were a representative of organized labor? I mean, that's an important constituency for any Democratic politician. Did you feel as though your labor credentials are a part of what you brought? Did it help his relationship with organized labor that you were the person whom he entrusted with the New Jersey office?
I think that to answer that question, I never thought of myself as a labor representative. Because even when I was a labor representative, I always thought of myself as a citizen first. It's just the way I am. He didn't expect me to be a labor representative. I was his man, and I absorbed his thinking and his style so that I could interpret him to regular people. Because suddenly he's diffident and he's aloof, and I'm a mixer, and it was a good marriage.
Speaking of good marriages, Jim Florio, much, much closer to your upbringing than Bill Bradley. High school dropout, goes into the military, comes back, was a boxer in the Navy, worked his way up. Did you find upon meeting Jim Florio that you had an affinity with him because of your common kind of upbringing? And then I do want to get into some of the differences and similarities between working for Bill Bradley and working for Jim Florio, because I think they'd be fascinating.
Well, Jim and Bill are much alike in their being totally committed to policy. They're both policy wonks. They're both highly informed about every issue, knowing the nuances and knowing where to go. I would say that Jim had more of an agenda as to what he wanted to do. Of course, he was the governor. And a senator, Bill learns quickly, I'm interpreting now, but he learned quickly to have to be there for 25 years to make any kind of an impact because of the seniority system, the committee system. When you get elected governor of New Jersey, the door is open and you're invited in to do what you have to do. And he was a very activist governor, and I admired him for it. But I never got close to him.
You feel as though you got closer to Bradley than you did?
Yeah, after a while. Of course, I was with Bradley.
Well, Bradley a lot longer.
11 years. And my relationship with Jim was very respectful. I probably hit the road more during the controversy of the tax, when he raised the taxes, than anybody in the cabinet, because I thought he did the right thing. But I didn't think he did it in the right way, but I thought he did the right thing.
Well, let's get to that.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, let's go back a little and find out how you made the transition from Bradley's state director to labor commissioner. What were your interactions with Jim Florio leading up to that?
Most of them were Jim's guy, Joe Salima, Jim's Ray Bramucci, didn't like Bradley.
This is when Jim was when Jim was in Congress.
Yes, and we always have disagreements about when to go somewhere, who's going to be there, you know, all these silly things that don't amount to a hill of raw beans. There was not a lot of love lost. Between Jim and Bill, there was a lot of respect. I said to Bradley after the '84 presidential election, I said, I'm getting ready to hit the road. Because there's a limit to how many people I can talk to about airplane noise, about liver cancer because of the polluted water supply, et cetera, et cetera. You know, at first it's a challenge. And after a while, it gets to be like going to see Hamlet in 7 different languages. It always comes out the same. And I was kind of getting fed up, and I said, you know, Bill, if you had run, I thought he should have run for president in '84. He was at the top of his game. I said, I'm going to be looking at some stuff in the public sector. Well, the next thing you know, Florio gets elected, and Florio's main guy was Doug Berman, if you remember. Doug Berman was named treasurer. Doug was Bill's deputy campaign manager. He was a protege of Susan Thomas's of the Travelgate fame in the Clinton administration. And I think Doug was the person trying to make a firmer connection between Florio and Bradley by putting me in there.
So was it Doug who approached you?
No, I got a call from the governor.
Mm-hmm. The governor-elect.
Yes, the governor-elect, yes.
Mm-hmm. And did he specifically have labor commissioner in mind?
Yes, yes, he knew what he wanted me to do. And I said to him, you know, Charlie Marchianti hates me.
Charlie Marchianti was the head of the state AFL-CIO at the time.
Yeah. He's, well, you're going to have to go and see him and tell him you're the new labor commissioner. I said, oh, okay.
How'd that go?
Not very well. But he was a pro. He grinned and bared it. You know, he bore it well, and that was 4 wonderful years because there wasn't anything in policy that I ever had any question about with the governor. I think he was right on almost every value he had and everything he did.
So you would not second guess any of the decisions that were made in those first 6 months, the auto insurance, the assault weapons, the taxes, the education reform, and so on.
Style. You know, it's like the diver. He gets style points in the Olympics. His style points were 3. He didn't have an appreciation for appearances. He was single-minded about the justification for doing what he wanted to do in the public interest. Mm-hmm. That you could not argue at all, in my opinion. But it's the abruptness and the inability to schmooze and to get people to understand why, outside of the logic of why you're doing something. It was a way of, it's a different style. He was doing it out of righteousness, not in the worst sense of that word, but because he had looked at that issue and thought it was the right thing to do for the state of New Jersey. And he did it. And frequently, it not only caused difficulty in the state, and things are always not what they appear, but it looked to me like, and some people have agreed, that on gun control, which he was absolutely correct about, the thing that brought him down by that little margin that he lost to the governorship were the National Rifle Association. Mm-hmm. They poured the money into the state, and all those local anti-tax people were just paid lackeys for them. You could see it happening.
Did you mention this to the governor at any time during the time that this was going on?
No. No.
Out of respect? Out of why?
I talked a lot to Berman. Berman was like a son to me because I was director. There were a couple of incidents that happened during various times between he and Bradley. And I knew how brash he was. And I knew he lacked the same kind of... Look, I'm 78 years old. There's no time now to start pussyfooting around. I love the guy. He's my friend. I invite him to our house. But he lacked the same finesse that Florio did. He was not a schmoozer. He was, I got it. I thought this thing through, and this is what it is. And that's what you do. And the combination was deadly. In terms of public relations, not political values and public respect, but the latter, the part about not understanding. I remember once when the new formula came through on funding for schools, the commissioner of education didn't have a clue what was in that proposal. He was lost. I think he came from Texas.
Right.
And to show you how wrong he was, he thought I was close to Florio. So he used to talk to me about things. And I'd look at him and say, whose eyes are you looking at this with? Florio brought in other people to design this thing and never really did the homework. I mean, Dan Dalton, one time I remember him in the governor's office just blowing his stack.
He was in the Senate at the
time. Yeah. Later became the Secretary of State.
Right.
Because he didn't know exactly. I remember him saying, I didn't know that this new formula would increase taxes in Cinnaminson. See, that part he didn't get, that the justice of the equalization affected certain constituencies negatively. Not that he didn't know, he just didn't credit it. But he was at least as knowledgeable about public affairs and the intricacies of policy choices of anybody you could possibly imagine in office. Jim Florio.
Did you feel as though you had sufficient access to him as a cabinet officer?
No, I never tried. I saw this quickly.
From him or from people around him?
Him and people. At that time, Persky was Chief of Staff.
Mm-hmm.
And Persky was amiable and stuff, but they were on another planet, as far as I was concerned. He just said, Ray, take care of this. That's all he said to me. Take care of this.
Take care of what?
Labor.
Okay.
And public issues that are involved with the relationship between employers and employees. And at that time, of course, labor's effect in the public sector was getting to be more and more fire and brimstone and less substance, because they were losing members. And what you had was a tension in the AFL-CIO between the building trades, who were the traditional guys, who Marchianti helped and represented, and the public employees. Mm-hmm. And there was a tension there, and they basically hated each other.
Well, the NJEA was a very important constituency group in getting Florio elected, and then a very important constituency group in turning on him. Mostly, as I recall, because of a specific part of the education reform that called for local school districts to pick up the full cost of paying for their pensions.
Well, it was a little, there was more to it. It forced the locals to come to grips more with the bottom line. I'll give you an example. We had a town meeting once in Fairlawn, and there were 10 or 12 pickets out front of the hall, and they apparently were young teachers who had been laid off. And there was a big stir, and people didn't know why they were there. And I found out why they were there. Well, the teachers' union decided to take the full wage increase, which was then, I think, 7, 8, 9%, rather than take 4% and have everybody work. This offended me. This is not the way I see life being handled with justice. So you get these 8 or 9 people sacrificed so everybody else could get the top dollar. And that began kind of symbolically a division, because they were using that as an excuse to be angry at the governor, and did it publicly. Mm-hmm. And I did have a conversation with him about it. I'm not sure how deeply it sank in. It was a main issue for me, but in the union I worked for 23 years, our philosophy was we shared the work. When it got slow, we went around the shop and found out who could afford to stay home, consistent with the manpower needs that the employer had. You needed this person and not that person, but we took care of it that way. And I know that it's a tradition in some unions that will never be changed, ever. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that I admire.
When you say that you went out, more than any cabinet officer, went out representing the administration in talking about the education reform and the tax reform, was this something that that the governor called upon you to do? Is this something that you volunteered to do? Did you, and do you think that what you tried to do was, as you refer to it, the schmoozing that he and Doug Berman were not especially good at?
They were brilliant, but that was not their best. And I think I volunteered for it, but nobody ever said anything to me as the press came in. I would go to the New Brunswick Chamber of Commerce, the Cinnaminson Lions, and in each place faced the Lions den of people who were yelling and screaming. I remember one exchange we had in this was in New Brunswick, right in this town, and this guy, these taxes are killing me. I said, which ones? And it just so happened that the tax he was talking about hadn't gone into effect yet. So I said, do you realize that tax doesn't take effect till next June? So how could it be killing you? And the whole place got quiet. Nobody cheered. But that was the impression people had. Totally misguided and wrong about the facts. So I enjoyed that kind of banter.
Mm-hmm. One of the criticisms of the early Florio administration, the first 6 to 9 months, was that all the decisions were reserved to this handful of people around the governor. One of those decisions was to have the state treasurer, Doug Berman, represent all of the departments of state government appearing before the Appropriations Committee. You may recall this button that everybody from the administration wore at the Legislative Correspondence Club dinner that year, saying, "Ask Doug." We don't answer any questions. Everything should be represented by the state treasurer. Did you bristle at that? Would you have wanted to go before the Appropriations Committee and represent the Labor Department's budget rather than leaving it to the treasurer?
You've heard me for half an hour. Do you think I did? I did. I told Doug at one point, beyond the general question of kind of demeaning I had so much to do, I didn't say demean long, because the other side of that coin was I was left alone. Just absolutely left alone to just carve it out and work at it.
No attempt to micromanage your department?
No, none. One of the happiest 4 years I've ever spent in public life. But I told Doug one time, because he was going to make an announcement about education. I don't remember exactly, but it was a place that the Commissioner of Labor should have been. I mean, Commissioner of Education, I'm sorry. But I said, Doug, you're going to be handling all of this bad news. You are going to be the most unpopular person in the state of New Jersey in 1 year. And I will tell you something. Nobody will be with you from the cabinet when you make that except me, because you're my friend. And sure enough, that's what happened. Mm-hmm. And it was wrong-headed. The coterie was too small. I guess the best way to describe this was I was quoted, not by name, that after a contentious cabinet meeting, which the governor didn't show up at, I was quoted as saying, "I feel like a mushroom, kept in the dark and have crap shoveled on me." And that's basically it became a joke, because it was driven by the coterie of people.
Now, I knew that that had been your quote, and I guess a number of people did, but I don't know if this is the first time that you've publicly admitted that that was you who made that statement.
It's part of my legacy.
I have to say, I think it was fairly widely known who said that.
Yeah.
But this did not affect your personal relationship with Jim Florio, which has remained pretty strong and friendly for
many years.
Many years.
Because I respected him. You've got to separate the style from the content. The content is 100%. The style is lacking. It's just, one day I said to him, he had a pair of, he used to wear in various meetings, he used to wear a pair of half glasses. Mm-hmm. And we were at Drum Thwacket, and I said, Jim, you got to wear those out. You look great in them.
Scholarly, I believe.
To me, well, people have their own interpretations, but I thought he looked gentler. Because he was very serious and very hard-hitting, very driven. And anything to soften that would be great. Mm-hmm. He just scoffed at it. It was window dressing and not worthy of any kind of respect. But that's a guy who came up the hard way and understood the world. He did. And so whatever differences personally, the policy that he was in favor of was everything that I could think of if I were there.
One of the areas that he was always interested in, and I know that he and Carl Van Horn and you worked on a lot, had to do with workforce development. That was a constant theme and led to the passage of the Workforce Development Partnership Act, which I think was probably the signature piece of legislation during the time that you were Labor Commissioner. Can you explain what that act is all about and what it accomplished?
Well, it became the precursor to federal policy, which was passed when I got there, ironically. The first act I had as an assistant secretary was to go to the White House and be with the president when he signed the Workforce Investment Act, which was practically copied from. Carl was the driving force and the knowledgeable person. We were lucky in New Jersey to have Bruce Coe then as the head of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, a person of uncommon decency and even-handedness. And we got it done, and among other things, but we did other things that were very interesting and thought to be not possible. We reformed the workers' comp court. We standardized the salary. We called for automatic review. When I got there in workers' comp, for instance, there might be a judge making $60,000 and somebody two miles away making 92. And the guy making 60 was 3 times the judge that the guy making 92 was. So we straightened that out. That was because of Bruce was agreeable. And we got it done. We were the only state in the union that passed extended benefits for unemployed and paid for it out of our own money. in the United States. And it was agreed to by the Business Industry Association. They agreed. I gave them my word. We would give back. We would pay it back. We would refurbish the fund. But a lot of the things that were done there, increasing the minimum wage, the unemployment insurance, all of those things, were because we had enlightened leadership in the business community.
Did you also have enlightened leadership in the opposition political party?
You had a large number of decent, forward-looking, minimally partisan members of the Republican Party.
And did that, I mean, I know that Governor Florio talks a lot about the fact that the second 2 years after a veto-proof Republican majority had been elected to the legislature, in some respects became very, very productive years because of the ability of the Florio administration, the Democrats, to work with the Republican majority in the legislature. Was that your experience as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There was none of this bloodletting about differences in what you said or what you felt. I mean, a guy like Chuck Katayan, who was a bread and butter conservative Republican, head of the Assembly, he was a decent guy. He was a decent guy. You could talk to him about any part of your agenda, and he might not be in favor of it, but he wasn't going to savage it. And that went for the Senate. It was a gentler and more decent time.
And this is just generally a difference in attitude compared to today. Yep. Do you find, though, in New Jersey that it is significantly less partisan than it is around the nation? I think so.
I think it is. Although some people in the legislature might not think so, but I think it is. I had opportunity to be the first chairman of the Joint Legislative Committee on Ethics. I didn't serve very long because I was working at Rutgers then, this hallowed institution.
And my recollection is that you were the compromise candidate because nobody else wanted it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I never shied away because it was a chance to. I had a lot of fun doing it because, well, there's a little story. I got a chance to tell our candidate for senator, Mr. Lonigan, to sit down and keep quiet, which was worth the 6 months I was there.
Now, when was this? And what was he running for?
There was a hearing, and he had filed 14 complaints. And oddly enough, they were all against Democrats. Ethics complaints. All of them against Democrats. I found that to be very shocking. And he came to make sure that this was going to get done. And he began talking. And I said, Mr. Lonigan, you've already had your say. This is not a public meeting. Sit down and keep quiet. And I got home and I said, it's worth it being in public life.
A fellow Bergen County.
Yeah.
Had you known him from way back? From his days as mayor
I
of
knew of his reputation of being kind of strange guy. But I hate to say it that way, but it's what I think.
How did you wind up on a legislative ethics committee? I thought that legislative ethics committees were made up of members of the legislature.
Well, I was the first civilian. And I can remember the first group of complaints. The Republicans expected me to just vote no on all of them as the chairman, but I didn't. Because I thought a couple of them had merit, and they were against prominent Democrats. Cody asked me to do this, and we never really had any agreement on anything. I just said, I'm going to just be me. Meaning, you're not going to be able to predict what I'm going to do.
Cody is Dick Cody. He was the Senate president.
Senate president. Yes, yeah. He and Kathy Crotty, who was then the very useful and very sensible his chief, they asked me, and I did. I served, and it was a very enjoyable time. Unpaid, of course. Well, most of my jobs were unpaid.
Well, not labor commission.
No. I'm trying to feel sorry for myself.
Yeah. Those last 2 years, painful in many ways for several people who worked in the administration and felt that now everything was a challenge to deal with this veto-proof Republican majority. Did you find you say that this was the most enjoyable 4 years that you spent in your life. Those last two were just as enjoyable as the first two?
Yeah, I have no recollection of any untoward disagreeableness. I got along well with the Republican chairs. They didn't subject my budget to unusual savagery. They were pretty measured, considering the political differences that were being escalated by the sweep. I thought it was mild compared to what I saw in Washington.
Did you feel less like a mushroom as the 4 years went on?
Yes, because I learned that intimacy and consultation back and forth is not going to happen. It's just out of the question. And it's not due to anything evil. It's just that's the way it is. And so long as I was able to carry out my responsibilities with support, and he was always supporting. I mean, once I told him it was okay, that we had touched the bases, we got along fine.
What would you say were your greatest triumphs as labor commissioner, and what were your greatest failings? What do you regret most about that period?
Failings first. This is a little esoteric, but permit me, because this is part of the duties of the labor commissioner. We had a long-standing dispute among the building trades in New Jersey between the union building trades councils and a certain contractor who ended up being the contractor who built the extension and the tunnel into Trenton. The big bone of contention was that this contractor was union, but he wasn't building trades. Because back in the day, when they were dissolving the mine workers, George Meany said to the steel workers, you're going to take these miners who were carpenters in the South, especially. And the building trades at that time was notoriously racist. And so they had nowhere to go, and so they formed this other union. Well, this guy had this contract with them. They were paid union wages, not building trade wages. And he was a very effective contractor. Efficient, on time, under cost, but the building trades had a vendetta against him. And I came within 3 inches of settling it. And it failed. And it involved a lot of things. We did a letter to we took a position with the Turnpike Authority, for instance. This is one area I said we should not do this. We took a position that in order to be eligible to be a contractor in New Jersey on the Turnpike, you had to be a member of the appropriate local building trades council, not union. Mm-hmm. Of course, it was thrown out the first time it got a hearing. I didn't like it, and it was selfish. And we almost settled it, except right at the end, some maverick guy in the carpenters down in Atlantic City did something, and it was blown forever. And that activity is what I think I do. Getting people of differing views to not hate each other or to make a deal because it makes sense. But I failed. And that was important because it affects the building trades and working people.
Manufacturing throughout the time that you were in office, and certainly since then, has gone from being a predominant activity in New Jersey to, I wouldn't say non-existent, but it certainly is virtually non-existent. Was there anything that could have been done? Do you feel as though there was anything that you did during the time that you were in office to ease that transition from a manufacturing economy to a service economy?
Well, I think the governor encouraged me, and certainly there were two major, there were three major automobile assembly plants in Jersey. One near Trenton that did seats and accessories in cars.
Was Fisher Body for GM?
Well, it was wholly owned by GM. Mm-hmm. And Toyota, Honda, all those companies had long ago bid that out. They didn't own it anymore. It was not an efficient place. It was an old factory. And the workers and management didn't get along. Another failure for me. And no matter what I did, it didn't work out. There's so much bad blood. It was indescribable. And it ended up closing. But the two other factories, one GM in Linden and one Ford in Edison, we paid attention to those two factories in a big way. As a matter of fact, this story will illustrate how much importance we gave it. GM was going to transition from cars to SUVs, what are now SUVs and trucks. And this is a major overhaul. And we gave them $3 million to cushion the training period, because involved in that were also new ways of robotically putting together the vehicle. And there was potentially a lot of trouble coming. And that was not a great place for labor management relations. But the Bergen Record criticized me for allowing $3 million to be put into an automobile plant in New Jersey. Because they thought of it as kind of welfare. You're going to give it to somebody who's really about ready to die. We gave it to a company that made a choice when there must have been 30 separate bids that GM got to move that plant somewhere else. Mississippi, Tennessee, not unionized states.
Right.
And so it became very important. When there was a layoff at GM or the Ford plant in Edison, the economy could be measured that it took a hit because of the compounding of the wages paid and the suppliers and all of the subcontractors. So that we paid attention to that. And that union also turned around its attitude about management. Put that aside now. We had the Ford plant. The Ford plant made a truck similar to the one the GM plant made. In Ford, it was the Ranger. They made it with 400 fewer workers because the union earlier had a very strong leadership in making accommodations with automatic devices, robots. And I spent a lot of time in that factory. I got to know many of the workers. I now read their names in the obit page of the Star Ledger. But that factory went from 32nd in the Ford empire to number one in efficiency, measured by the complaints made to the dealer or to the parent company by consumers. They made the best truck under the best circumstances, And it became evident to me immediately that the union ran the plant. The union did the hiring. They were right in the middle of the plant floor, their office. And it didn't mean that they diminished their support for the workers an iota. But they took ownership of making sure that that truck was made the best. So the plant manager said to me, 20 years ago, you go in the parking lot and you wouldn't see a Ford automobile. Well, you'd see some, but you'd see all the foreign cars. Now, that's all you see. They were buying their own stuff. So we had an effect, but it was like trying to keep the garment industry in New York. Futile. We made so little that it was almost poverty wages. But we made 10 times more than they made in Bangladesh.
Mm-hmm.
And
that continues today.
Yeah. And it's inevitable because that's an industry where discrimination and exploitation has always been a centerpiece because it's done on the cheap. Yeah. But and it's very evident that that kind of policy by Ford was early in recognizing that the welfare of the members of the union was inextricably tied to the welfare of the company. That didn't mean they had to give up everything. It means that they had to function in a different way. And they did. And one of the reasons there is now an automobile industry in the United States of America is because of that trust that was engendered, that President Obama could take advantage of at the bargaining table, because the union had to eat crow. Make no mistake about it. They had to establish a sub-wage under what the regular guys do, and they affected some of the pension rights that were substantial. But they made the deal. And now that's the single growing manufacturing industry in the United States. And people make a sustainable income. And they haven't taken any water in the boat in terms of justice for workers. It's a better place to work. But we were on the cutting edge of that because we encouraged them.
You had a reputation at the Labor Department of having a particularly good senior staff. Want to talk about that a little? Well,
my experience as a leader is you pick the right people and then you get out of their way. It's kind of indicative of my approach. The two main people who I brought in were Oliver Quinn and Bill Foster. Bill was a professor here, psychology, and Oliver was a public guy, a lawyer, active in the Rutgers Law School, Newark campus. I ran into him when he was the head of Urban League. And I used to keep a book of minorities who are sharp and who I think would be up to snuff. And I had his name in. And I liked Foster because Foster was a congressional fellow for Bradley.
Okay. I didn't know how you had done him.
Yeah, and I vetted him actually when he got there. I also vetted Ralph Izzo, by the way. Anyways, where was I?
Quinn and Foster.
Yeah. So I called him up. I hadn't talked to Quinn in months. I said, Oliver, I was just named labor commissioner. Would you like to work for me? He said, yeah. What position? I said, I don't know. I got two major positions. I'll let you know. I called Foster and I told him the same thing. And then I told them together, they ought to get together and tell me which one is chief of staff and which one is the assistant commissioner or deputy. And they worked it out themselves. They had never met before. Quinn became the deputy and Foster became chief of staff. Now, what I'm proud of is there were no defections in the 4 years. There are certain politicians that come into office with fanfare, and all of their key supporters leave quickly. There's a noteworthy candidate now for senator in the Democratic Party. His inner guard left him within a year and a half. Something is wrong. It means you haven't found a good place for people. You're not giving them enough to do and the authority to do it.
In fairness, that was Jim Florio's reputation as a congressman.
Well,
but not as governor.
No, governor, there's so much to do as governor. In a congressional office, so much of it is a pecking order. It's a microcosm of humanity at its worst. Who did the senators stop in front? Who rode in the car? Who was in the Senate subway?
So have you watched the show House of Cards, the British program that's been converted into an American series? It absolutely captures that.
Captures it. I haven't seen it. I probably will try to now that you've recommended it. But morale starts at the top. Either you got to establish trust that you will not second guess and make the person who's taking authority and initiative feel compromised. So I used to tell everybody below these two guys, look, when you talk to them, you talk to me. Don't play games. If he told you that, I may even disagree. I agree. That's what it is. So we're still very close friends because we did something and people did what they had to do. Bill took care of the building. Oliver was the guardian on the law, how it's written, how you draft legislation. For instance, the workforce investment that Carl was he was a critical person in the Florio campaign and office. He had the respect of everybody, and he had Jim's ear. Rare. He was a human being, a nice guy besides being a thoughtful guy. And we worked.
You must have had dealings with Carl Van Horn before your time.
Never met him.
Really?
Never met him. And, I didn't know, I'd like to show you how graphic this can become. John Heldridge, the respected and revered, he's an icon here in New Brunswick, former Johnson & Johnson VP and a great guy, a noted Republican, had been named to the Employment and Training Commission by, I think, Governor Kane. And I got a couple of hints from the office in Trenton of the governor, not the governor, that maybe you ought to find somebody else. There's nothing doing. He's somebody that speaks straight. He knows employers, and he's sympathetic to workers. And he and I had a marvelous relationship, even though he's a Yankee fan, by the way, John Heldridge. But I wouldn't think of it. I once got a call from one of the state senators to dump one of the administration people because he was some kind of a Republican. Well, the only thing I knew about him was in his private life, he refereed basketball games. But I said, give me an instance of what egregious thing this guy did to compromise his objectivity. They didn't have anything. I said, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. And that person was, it's not heroic. It's just, that's the way you've got to do it if you're going to keep people near you, loyal to you, and work hard without being told what to do.
You made brief mention of your time as Undersecretary of Labor in the Clinton administration. Let's talk a little bit about what your life has been since the Florio administration.
Well, oddly enough, this Oliver Quinn story comes back because Oliver Quinn had been deputy solicitor of the Department of Labor. Now, the Department of Labor is the only institution.
Is the U.S. Department.
U.S. Department of Labor is the only institution outside of the Justice Department that can file lawsuits. None of the other departments do. They give it to Justice. Labor, you file your own lawsuits. So Oliver was the second in command. And the new secretary, he worked with Bob Reich. The new secretary was Alexis Herman, and she knew Oliver, and she asked him to be the solicitor. And Oliver said, no, I'm back home trying to establish my life again with my family. And as he's leaving, she says, do you know anybody that could be assistant secretary for employment and training? And Oliver says, yeah, Ray Bramucci. Here's his phone number.
Now, is this is after you had left the New Jersey Department of Labor?
Yes. Oh, I was, yeah, by 3 or 4 years.
Oh,
this was 1990. I was doing arbitration. I was teaching. I was doing a whole bunch of stuff, like you'd have done. And next thing you know, I got a call. I was living in Bergenfield at the time, and said, this is so-and-so from the White House. I said, oh, yeah? I was going to say, yeah, and I'm in Portugal right now. But it turned out I met Alexis, and she and I hit it off, and I was nominated. However, there's a little story here, too, of course. There were many other candidates. One guy was an official of the New York State AFL-CIO, made a speech on the steps of the State House in New York saying he was the next secretary. Now, that office...
Not assistant secretary,
the next assistant secretary. He was about to be named. Mm-hmm. Now, that office has discretionary spending when I was there of $13.5 billion. That's not his budget, that's the discretionary side. So he was a candidate. The AFL-CIO wanted him. There was a candidate from New Jersey who's now in jail, who also was a candidate. And I went to see Frank Lautenberg to get his support after I was offered the job. I said, Frank, I need you to help me. He said, Ray, somebody's telling you a story. It's not going to happen. I said, Frank, I just left the Department of Labor, the secretary's office. She offered me the job. He said, no way. So we waited and waited and waited.
Did this position require Senate confirmation?
Yeah, Senate confirmation. And I got entangled in a problem that the secretary had with the Vidalia onion growers of Georgia. And I didn't know what a Vidalia onion was. I know now. And I was held up for 6 or 7 months. And I lost 2 clients. It was getting serious. We were at my daughter's house, and a phone call came in, and Frank Lautenberg's AA said, Ray, get home. You're going to make it tonight. Apparently, Frank Lautenberg went to bat for me with a key White House staffer saying, we don't get Bramucci, you don't get this bill. It was a night session. So we run home. I'm charged up, local boy makes good. Senator Jeffords gets up to the lectern, and I say, Sue, this is it. He said, I move the unanimous consent for the following nominations. And I'm waiting. Ray Bramucci, number 126, number 328, 415, and 908.
Did you have any idea what your number was?
No. I said, I think I made it. She said, how do you know? I said, I don't know. So I called the legislative people at the Department of Labor in Washington. I said, what number was I? She said, I don't know. But I made it. On that impersonal note, I expected a crescendo, bands playing, my hero. No, I don't remember what my number was, but it was an odd thing, and it took me a while to get there.
And once you got there, what did you do?
I hit the road. I basically, the fellow who was there as the civil servant was a superb technician. His name is Ray Uvalde. He retired with great honors. He was the ultimate inside player with laws, with personnel, with everything. I said, Ray, I have no interest in this. I have no interest in reading 5-page summaries. I'm going to go out and see what happens when we give somebody $5 million to do something. So I spent my 3 years on the road, walking into centers, community centers, factories, union halls, social service agencies, to see. Because we then became, the Labor Department was given the authority to find jobs for the hardest to employ during welfare reform. And largely, as a testament, that ended welfare as we know it. And my old boss was against it, the Clinton approach with the Republicans. I liked it because there were carrots along with the stick. Said you got to work, but here we're going to do this until you do. And so that was a $2 billion program. I spent more time with welfare recipients than I ever spent with any group of people in my life in that year, all over the country. I heard their stories, and I learned, for instance, that welfare reform was not about workers or people would-be workers. It was about women. There were no men. The men were on local relief. So I learned, for instance, in LA, I was meeting with a group of welfare recipients, and their morale was sky high. Sky high. Because they were expected to do something, and it wasn't punitive. There was a balance. You got to get off your butt and get over here, and here's what we're going to do while you make this transition. Well, there are about 300 people in the room. There are probably 500 or 600 apartments. And the building manager told me only one apartment was rented to a man. He was a retired postal worker. Now, there were men in all those buildings, but because of the way the law was written, they were avoiding responsibility to pay for the kids, officially. A lot of them were. So it was a very exciting time, and we freewheeled, and we tried to set an example and get out and push people in a way that was consistent with my beliefs about human dignity.
But it doesn't sound to me as though you had the same passionate enjoyment of that period that you did of the period that you were in the state labor department.
Oh, I did. More time has gone by. Time, it's like having sandpaper on experience. It just rubs away the high points. I was a very happy man then. I couldn't believe that from my humble beginnings, my mother and father, my father went to the first grade in Italy, and he was the family intellectual. My mother went to the 4th grade, and nobody ever expected me to be anything. They loved me, and they knew I was a little smart, but their view of me was that if I paid attention to things and was a good person, I could be the assistant foreman in one of these factories in town. Until he died, my father never understood what I did. He would just keep, what are do? Why do people pay you? A lot of people want to know what the answer to that is. But from those humble beginnings, to end up sitting next to Janet Reno at a bill signing, and I would go because Alexis Herman was thought to have something in her past, and the Attorney General asked for a special prosecutor. And Herman didn't like that. And so she never liked Janet Reno. So if there was any joint ventures with the Labor Department, so I was sitting next to her in this program. Believe me, there are 28 signatures, people flashing pictures, and she said to me, Mr. Secretary, whatever happens after this? I said, probably nothing. She said, I thought so. And at one point, she had palsy, and it was bad. And she had her leg and right arm going like this. And I was sitting next to her, and I looked over at her. She said, it's not as bad as it looks. She's a nice person, good person, and an independent person. But having that ability to say, yeah, I know her. Yeah, I've been there.
Well, from what you describe as humble beginnings, you did wind up being a visiting professor of global economics at Adelphi University.
I tell you, they throw away titles now. And I had no one listening to me. I went to Adelphi in a graduate program. They hired me to do this seminar. And I had about 18 or 20 graduate students. None of them cared what I was saying. They were there because their employer had said, if you go and get a master's degree, you're going to get a raise and you can be something else. They had no fascination with the policy, with the intricacies, with the issues. And I used to think I liked teaching. After that experience, maybe in the 5th grade I like it. But I taught at Montclair, at Rutgers. I was also the director of the Prudential Business Ethics Center at Rutgers for 2 years.
And of the Institute of Work at Seton Hall?
We founded that, and it consisted with my beliefs of building consensus with working people and advocating for their reasonable well-being and respect and responsibility. So I've been fortunate. I have no regrets. I don't think I should have done anything that I didn't do. What I did, I tried to do the best I could. And one piece of advice I always rendered, especially when I was dealing with at-risk kids, which remains my abiding interest. Those kids, about 5.5 million of them, who are out of school, out of work, between 17 and 22, is that no matter what you look like, whatever shape you're in, whatever color your face is, whatever language you speak, or the languages you can't speak, if you work hard, you'll be respected.